Hello. I don't see you very well, but in any case, I will tell you that it's my great honor to address you today at this closure of this LibertyCon conference. From the outset, let me be clear, I'm not a libertarian. My views are more in line with liberal conservatism. Conservatism understood as how citizenship involves not just rights, but duties and responsibilities for each other. But this is relevant. What is important is what brings us together. We are in the same trenches. That is what makes this event remarkable and why it is not for rhetoric's sake that I say that I'm honored to be speaking to you. What we need today throughout society is engagement, particularly from young people. And you being here today on a beautiful Saturday in Madrid, coronavirus notwithstanding, are a paradigm of the engagement I'm referring to. Yours is a generation that is engaged. You push for change. I see it here in Spain, through Europe, and in the world from Venezuela to Hong Kong to Algeria. And this is heartening. But what makes this gathering noteworthy is not just this elan, but the desire to act rationally and with reason in a channeled way, not as fearful doomsday sheep, but with purpose. And this is in severe shortage today, and frankly, it's crucial. So, congratulations for being here. Because you know, the world, you know well, by the way, the world is at a time of mutation. And I choose that word carefully. This is not a new world or a renovated world. It is a mutating world. A mutation takes what exists and alters it. So what is left looks familiar, but doesn't function as it used to do. It creates a disorientation that we perceive everywhere and which is having a profound impact in our societies and in the international order. In the context of those broad shifts, the divide between libertarianism and liberalism is a distinction without a real transcendence. For at their heart, these two movements, these two views of the world, are both about unlocking the individual through the instruments of reason and rationality. And it is precisely these common elements, the primacy of the individual, the reliance on rationality, and the centrality of human reason that are eroding rapidly around us. And so, I will dedicate this address to underlining these common challenges that we must recognize and face head-on with energy, thoughtfulness, and flexibility. And it's you that are engaged there. You, the young generation, you are especially crucial, particularly in Europe, because we are an aging society. It is easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the world has passed by us. And this breeds fear and suspicion and irrationality, and we are seeing it. Adaptation also becomes harder. The human brain is a remarkable instrument, and its environment shift, the brain itself transforms, creating new linkages and neuronal connections to respond to new stimuli. As the brain ages, however, it loses its plasticity. Responding to change is harder and frustrating. It is comforting to resort to familiar patterns, even though the outcomes are not the same. Today, the West, and particularly we Europeans, risk a plasticity deficit at the exact moment in which adaptability is needed most. This is why you here are so important. And so, what are these challenges I'm speaking about that we face? I have selected three core ones. each manifesting in a different realm, but all playing back to our common view of the primacy of the individual, the importance of rational thought, and the centrality of human reason. First is the challenge to the idea of the individual as central actor in the context of a shifting global order that has seen the emergence of a communal, antagonic model of governance pushed by China. Then we have the erosion of rationality in our domestic societies and the concurrent rise of populism. Finally, is the question of the role of human reason as we enter into a new area of artificial intelligence that will be increasingly dominating all our areas of work. There are obviously many more challenges, but these three, the individual, rationality, and human reason, are a strong foundation both for finding common ground and, more importantly, for acting. Let's start with the primacy of the individual. For the last 3 centuries, the ethic of the Enlightenment, of unlocking the individual and of inexorable human progress has been ascendant. For the last century, it has been dominant and has seen the establishment of a rules-based order, the state, institutions, the affirmation of human rights. The post-Cold War international system, with the United States as hegemon, established a particularly full-throated liberal vision as the standard for both global order and governance. Europe and the European construction is part of it. Liberal democracy and the valorization of individual rights were not just a model, but the model. And yes, there were many flaws, imperfections, illiberal elements, distortions, even atrocities. But the model was virtually unchallenged. With the turn of the 21st century, we saw cracks, first in relation to what was named the global war on terror, which forced difficult decisions to be made regarding trade-offs between freedoms and values on the one hand and security on the other. Even more than the obvious examples from the 1990s that put the lie to the idea that the end of history was upon us, and I think of Srebrenica, and the war of the Balkans in general, Rwanda or Kosovo, what we have is that the compromise of the post-9/11 era weakened this model of perfection of liberal democracy and triumph of this enlightened idea. More so, 2008 financial crisis crippled what in the post-Cold War era had become the central legitimating factor for the liberal model, which is prosperity. The ramifications were particularly grave in Europe, and we are still feeling them today. Broadly, what these cracks created was an opening for an alternative model, and in this space has entered China. 14 years ago, Premier Deng Xiaoping began China's move towards modernization and opening up. The conventional wisdom in the West has been to encourage openness and engagement with the idea that incorporating China into the rules-based international order would change it from within to start bringing pluralism and launching an evolution. 20 years ago, this thinking ushered the way for China to become a member of WTO. Today, we know that this has all been fanciful thinking. China has changed the international order and system much more than the system has changed China. The state and the Communist Party retain control. Indeed, the party, perhaps today, is even more powerful and in greater control than ever before. Meanwhile, we see growing signs that China is pushing to establish a separate parallel system with itself at the center. There is the development of zombie institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank and the New Development Bank, which mimic existing international structure. More important is the Belt and Road Initiative, the clearest manifestation of Chinese efforts to reposition itself as the Middle Kingdom. Not in the middle of the world, as many think. No, in the Middle Kingdom means between heaven and earth, which has consequences on how you look at rule of law, for instance. In September, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres used this address of the UN General Assembly to warn of a coming great fracture, I'm quoting him, great fracture, of the emergence of two competing global systems built around two competing power bases with two competing visions for mankind. One centered in the individual and the other one centered in the group. One was the existing rules-based liberal order founded on American power and supported by the West. The other was the system being built by China. Though Guterres was evoking a return of bipolarity that marked the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, this is nothing to do with a redo of the Cold War. The Chinese system marks a truly fundamental contrast. The Chinese system is about the collective, about seeking harmony through the suppression or elimination of disruptive views. We see it manifest in tragic ways, such as the resettlement, detention, and re-education of the Uyghurs, and in more subtle ways, in the creeping tentacles of the AI, the artificial intelligence-driven surveillance state. It is a model that instrumentalizes law and promotes transactional views of the world. Most of all, it's a system that crushes the individual in the name of promoting the whole. With the emergence of the new era of great power competition between the United States and China, there are voices in Europe which have seen an advantage of sitting in the middle on the frontier between these two systems. Frontier territory, after all, offers certain advantages and opportunities for arbitrage, but at what cost? Europe is a construction of law. It is founded on the idea of individual rights and values. Transactionalism is anathema to our being. This is beyond question about Huawei or competition. It is about our philosophical moorings, how we see the world. If we dispense with that and aid the construction of a parallel structure built on fundamental alien values, we risk being lost in it. We risk, and this is a diplomatic expression. This is not to say that Europe should turn its back to China. We cannot. But we must be rooted in our values and on the importance of the rules and the law. We are slaves, we are free because slaves of the law, and this is the Romans that just got that, and this hasn't changed. We cannot lose sight of the fundamental position of the individual and the importance of that grounding. Now, second challenge, I mentioned this challenge to rationality, rise of populism. Even as this battle of ideas begins to play out globally, we face a closer challenge, a challenge within our societies, the erosion of rationality, which brings us to the classic Weberian taxonomy of legitimacy. Let me just mention it. Around 100 years ago, as the modern nation-state began to develop, Max Weber wrote about the basis of legitimacy within society. For a system to survive, he said, it has to establish and cultivate a belief in its legitimacy. He outlined three types of legitimacy. First, traditional authority, a regime that is based on ritual and continued practice, on history. Second, charismatic authority, and we all know what this is about. Finally, was rational legitimacy, a system whose legitimacy is based on the rational self-interest of the citizens, rational self-interest of the individuals. For Weber, such system was produced by a predictable, Again, predictable, rules-based order administered by a well-functioning bureaucracy. But for our purposes, here, the important element is that it is a system in which individuals are actors and calculate self-interest to behave accordingly, protected by the predictability of the rule of law. As liberal democracy consolidated in the second half of the 20th century, we saw an increasing reliance on this last form of legitimacy, rational legitimacy. Over time, particularly as governance became more complex and regulation more pervasive, and as government became essentially a black box, this legitimacy became increasingly founded on performance. This idea of prosperity is linked with this. On performance rather than a more general appreciation of systemic predictability of the type Weber describes. In such a circumstance, government takes on the form of service provider with citizens as customers. As is the nature of such a relationship, buying is fickle. When the system is perceived not to deliver, there is a strong impetus for exit, which is precisely what we witnessed following the financial crisis with the rise of anti-system forces on both left and right. We can add to this mixed social dislocation from new media, which has made rational choices difficult, yes, of course, but also the breakdown of the mediating institutions. We need to reflect upon that from within societies that bonded people together to the system. And I mean political parties, I mean churches, I mean unions, families, communities in general. With these connectors gone, the framework that helped link people together across the socioeconomic spectrum and to society as a whole has disappeared, is disappearing. And it creates a sensation of drift. And there, to take advantage of this drift, were leaders professing other characteristics, not rationality, but tradition or charisma, often both. It is no surprise that in this era we have heard calls to make America great again or give my Great Britain back. Nostalgia, often cloaked in nationalism, has become the name of the game. And this is the very opposite of a rational perspective, and indeed it is not a surprise that often the biggest purveyors of these messages are the ones playing fastest and loosest with reality. What is needed are approaches bound to the future, not a yearning from an Arcadian past that never existed and which doesn't offer solutions to the challenges that we are facing today. And yet we continue to see politicians, successful politicians, go back to this well because it works. It offers a sense of place to people feeling dislocated. Again, but at what cost? We see from this an erosion of the values that have formed the basis of our societies. A decade and a half ago, there was much hand-wriggling about polling showing the return in popularity of Stalin in Russia and the desire for the return of a strongman rule. Today, this, as I say, it was 15, 20 years ago. Today we see those same types of polls in Western Europe. It should be alarming that more than 49% of Italians in a recent poll thought that the government should be led by an all-powerful and unaccountable leader. It generated barely a blip, barely a blip. What is desperately needed, therefore, is an effort to put rationality and reason back at the center of policy. In prescription, here we may differ, as the vehicle I foresee in doing this is creating more robust citizenship, one based not just on rights but duties, which creates real stakes and skin in the game. Some of you here may have other solutions, but whatever the path we take, it is absolutely crucial to work towards a reinfusion of rationality and sensibility into public choice. Without this, we are doomed to drift further still. And I go to my third challenge, the rise of artificial intelligence. What makes all this particularly urgent and challenging is that we are not drifting at a moment of stasis, at a calm moment in history, but rather of vertiginous technological development that implicates our very humanity, our ability to reason. We are entering a new technological era with the rise of our artificial intelligence, just as a moment in which we are losing our philosophical groundings. As Henry Kissinger has noted, and I quote, "The Enlightenment started with essentially philosophical insight spread by new technology. Our period is moving in the opposite direction. It has generated a potentially dominating technology, artificial intelligence, which is in search of a guiding philosophy. The danger is that as AI moves ahead at pace we have not really managed to focus on what it means and how to channel it. We are too busy fighting the battles of last century to pay attention to the challenges and opportunities of our century today. AI has the potential to liberate or to dominate, but the longer we dither with ineffectual leadership and sectarianism, the less we will be able to influence that direction. There is a real danger that we all will become merely data points for increasingly powerful algorithms that can define not just our musical or shopping preferences, but our political choices, our professional endeavors, and our life decisions. It calls into question the existence of free, rational choice. This is not a development we should simply slide into. There is a real need for sensible, determined action. The beginning of this effort is a reaffirmation of our belief and commitment to a society with the individual as at its center, an individual empowered by rational thought and human reason. It is desperately sad that these fundamental ideas that have run through the Western thought for the last 300 years are in need of such a confirmation. But that is where we are in this mutating world. And so, let me conclude where I began. My great honor at being here today. Because this type of conversation is how this work will be going forward, how we will get it going, how we will manage to prevail. And each of you will go back to your communities and have further conversations and engage. This has to be a movement, a real effort at reaffirming our priorities and our core values. It is too easy today to sit back with passivity and resignation, to simply shrug shoulders and muddle through. That will get us nowhere. What we need is a fight. There are real stakes here. Unless we stand up and have confidence in who we are and what we believe in, we will be doomed to simply float along in someone else's world. But this is your world. For all the doom and gloom surrounding us, there is a future. There is path forward. And this is embodied by you here today. You, intellectually curious, challenging conventional wisdom, refusing to fall in line with sheepish fads of the moment, bringing sense back to society. Never lose that. For that spirit is precisely what we need right now. Thank you.